So we've seen that Locke's theory seems to have to admit some kind of physical basis to the continuity over time of a person. In the absence of that physical basis, it's not clear what the causal process could be that would enable us to distinguish between genuine memories and quasi-memories. That's one potential objection to Locke's view. Here's another that might be more direct. Some of you might have seen one of my favorite movies called Memento. And in that movie, the main character's name is Lenny, and Lenny suffers from a brain injury known as anterior grade amnesia that makes him unable to make new memories. He's got memories of his life before the accident that caused this brain injury, but he doesn't, after the accident, he's not able to form new memories. So he starts a conversation with somebody, looks away, and then looks back at the person and says, "Where'd you come from? How'd you get here?" Having no memory of the fact the person had been there up until 10 seconds ago. But he can remember things from before his injury, although he cannot form new memories even after 30 seconds have gone by after the experience that he just had. So what do we want to say about a situation like that? That seems to put pressure perhaps even on Locke's refined definition of personal identity. So notice that Lenny can remember experiences had by let's call him Lenny before the accident, let's just call him Lenny before. And let's call him Lenny N can remember experiences had by Lenny before. And Lenny N minus 1 can remember experiences had by Lenny before the accident as well. But Lenny N neither does nor can remember experiences had by Lenny N minus 1. So, and there's no shorter series of links that can connect Lenny N and Lenny N minus 1 following Locke's refined criterion. So it seems like Lenny N and Lenny before are the same person, and Lenny N minus 1 and Lenny before are the same person from what we said before. But we also seem to have the conclusion that Lenny N and Lenny N minus 1 are not the same person. What follows? Well, since identity is transitive, we can also infer that Lenny N is the same person as Lenny N minus 1, so we get yet another contradiction. Here's a diagram. Lenny at, for example, 11 o'clock one morning after the accident can remember experiences had by pre-accident Lenny and Lenny before. Lenny at noon, an hour after Lenny at 11, can also remember experiences had by pre-accident Lenny, but Lenny N at noon can't remember experiences had by Lenny at 11, nor can he remember experiences had by a previous Lenny, which can trace back to an experience had by a Lenny previous to it, et cetera, all the way back to Lenny at 11. They're totally disjoint person stages. So that if that's right, Lenny at noon seems to nevertheless be the same person as pre-accident Lenny. And as we said, Lenny at 11 is the same person as pre-accident Lenny, but Lenny at noon seems to bear no direct or indirect connection or links to Lenny at 11, and so Lenny at 11 seems to be distinct from Lenny at noon, and yet by transitivity we also have that Lenny at 11 is the same person as Lenny at noon. So again, we get what seems to be a contradiction. Something seems to have to give in Locke's theory. It seems clear that it's the same Lenny all through the story, and if that's right, then Locke's theory, which seems to imply otherwise, seems to be in trouble. Perhaps this idea of memory links, even in the refined sense we've suggested, is not necessary for personal identity over time, even if it is sufficient. And likewise, think about how Lenny's different from a case of multiple personality disorder. We have, in the case of multiple personality disorder, we have multiple people inhabiting one body. In the case of Lenny, what do we have? Could we have one body and perhaps multiple people at different moments? That doesn't seem very plausible. It seems like it's the same guy, he just can't remember anything that happened to him a moment ago. Now, philosophers that were more or less contemporary with Locke, or came a little bit thereafter, like Thomas Reid, thought that Locke was onto something reasonable but didn't get things quite right. He thought that the memory links theory was useful as an indication of identity, but not as a definition of identity. He writes, "Although memory gives the most irresistible evidence of my being the identical person that did such a thing in the past, at such and such a time, I may have other good evidence of things which befell me and which I do not remember. For example, I know who bare me, that is who gave birth to me, and I know who suckled me, that is who I nursed, what person nursed me. But I do not remember these events, even though Reid will say, I'm the same person. So Reid concludes from this that, in writing, it's not my remembrance of an action of mine that makes me the same person who did it. That's not what makes me the same person. It's an indication of it, but it's not what makes me the same person. This remembrance makes me know assuredly that I did it, but I might have done it, though I don't remember it at all. That relation to me, which is expressed by saying that I did it, would be the same, though I had not the least remembrance of it. So Reid wants to reject Locke's theory of personal identity as a definition of personal identity in terms of memory links, and just say memory links are indications or evidence of sameness of person over time, but they're not what makes me the same person over time. To which you might ask, well, Reid, what's your theory of personal identity over time? His reply essentially is to deny that it's possible to give a helpful answer to that question. He writes, if you ask a definition of identity, I confess I can give none. It's too simple a notion to admit of a logical definition. That is, he takes the idea of identity over time as fundamental and indefinable. He thinks that there is such a thing as identity over time. He thinks that it does happen. That is, I am the same person as was sitting here 10 minutes ago, for example, but he doesn't think that it's a notion that can be defined and therefore that we can get any philosophical insight into. So he essentially throws in the towel. Likewise, David Hume, who we discussed before, for example, under the rubric of Hume's principle, also discussed Locke's theory of personal identity. And he suggests the following. He thinks that the idea of personal identity over time is, in fact, in a way, illusory. Unlike Reid, who thinks it's a genuine thing, Hume is skeptical that there's a genuine notion of personal identity over time that we could possibly believe to be accurate. He writes, for my part, when I enter most intimately into what I call myself, I always stumble on some particular perception or other of heat or cold, light or shade, love or hatred, pain or pleasure. I can never catch myself at any time without a perception, and never can observe anything without the perception itself as well. So his idea seems to be, when I try to look inside and find myself, all I find are particular emotions and experiences and thoughts, images, etc., never a self. And he concludes from this that, in a sense, the idea of personal identity is a kind of, perhaps is kind of a mythology. That is, the foregoing remark from Hume and his general empiricist tendencies suggest that there's no reason to believe in this notion of diachronic personal identity. Hume seems to hold that the idea of diachronic personal identity is perhaps a sort of fiction that we spin for convenience. Maybe it's just a matter of convenience that we discuss sameness of person over time, as opposed to that notion capturing an objective phenomenon. He writes, as support for this reading, identity is nothing really belonging to these different perceptions and uniting them together, but is merely a quality which we attribute to them because of the union of their ideas in the imagination when we reflect upon them. That is, remember from Hume's principle, Hume said a collection, for example, a nation or a city, is nothing over and above all the individuals making it up and their way of interacting with each other. There's no, drawing a boundary around a certain geographical region is really a matter of a mental construction rather than something that is there objectively in itself. Likewise here too, Hume will say, being a person is something that we just write on to individuals, so to speak. We ascribe it to individuals rather than discover it. It's a fiction that we create for our own convenience, not something that refers to something objectively real. But this is something we might ask about. Can we be content with this? When we're deciding whether to, for example, punish this person for what this person stage, for what that some other earlier person stage did, we don't seem to presuppose that diachronic personal identity is in the eye of the beholder or a matter of convenience. We want to know whether this is the person that, for example, shot somebody in cold blood last year at a gas station. We want to know whether this is the person that stole money out of that bank and killed a number of other individuals in the process. We want to know whether this is the person that hacked into the computer program and did lots of damage, such as was found out about some months ago. It doesn't seem like that's a matter of conventional stipulation, but rather of discovery. And if that's right, then perhaps we can't rest content with Hume's skepticism about personhood.